On the Pacific, you have a young woman. Her body floated across a part of the ocean. She drowned about 40 miles and then washed ashore within walking distance of where she lived with her parents. I wrote a book called Sailing by Starlight about a geography professor from New Jersey, nonfiction again, who sailed around the world. And he did it with no instruments at all. No sextant, no compass. He didn't even take a wristwatch.
Love listening to Deck Tales? Be sure to smash that subscribe button so you never miss a seaworthy story, fascinating insight, or incredible behind-the-scenes moment. Climb aboard, stay shipshape, and catch every episode fresh off the boat the second it drops. Ahoy ahoy to all you smooth sailors out there, and welcome aboard the Deck Tales podcast. I'm your host and captain, Sammy Catlin, and this is where we dive headfirst into life at sea. From stunning destinations to unexpected storms, our guests have stories that will make you laugh, gasp, and maybe even shed a tear. Whether you're a seasoned sea dog or simply curious about life on board, Deck Tales is your boarding pass to a world of nautical narratives. My guest today is Mr. Rod Scher, a man who's forged a writing career out of asking one simple question. So, what went wrong? He's a former English teacher, tech editor, accidental software developer, and the author of 6 books that prove the ocean always keeps receipts. He joins us now from the graveyard of the Pacific, where shipwrecks outnumber coffee shops. So let's anchor up and dive right in.
Hi, Sam.
Hello, Rod.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, sir. How are yourself?
Not too bad, not too bad.
Where are you calling from today? Thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm calling from Depot Bay, Oregon, which is more or less Central Oregon coast.
Oh, so that's West Coast.
Correct.
Only reason I know that, Rod, is because of the video game that I used to play on the computer back when I was a kid. I'm sure you know which one I'm referring to.
I don't.
No, you've never heard of it? The Oregon Trail.
Oh, that one. Okay, yeah, I do. I have heard of it. Sorry. Yeah. Drew a blank there for a second.
Quite a dark game. One of the first games I think I used to play on the old PC when we had the dial-up modem.
I think it was one of the first games, period, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, Pong might have something to say about that.
Yeah, okay.
Side note, I just Googled it and it turns out I was wrong. Pong initial release date was 29th of November 1972, whereas the Oregon Trail first came out on the 3rd of December 1971. Sorry, Rod, I'll never question you again. I fell down a little bit of a rabbit hole in my search to answer the question, what was the first ever video game? And there are a few that have a close claim to it, such as Oxo, which is basically noughts and crosses or tic-tac-toe, and another one called Sheep and Gates. But the one that's widely considered to be the very first was made by British scientist Christopher Strachey. Strachey? Strachey. I don't know. Yeah. Who made a computer program of drafts, otherwise known as checkers. Meaning video games are technically a British invention. Goodness. End of side note. But in terms of on like a home PC, the object was to get your cart or your wagon from the East Coast across to the West Coast. And it was during the whole pioneer times. So your whole family were on board and you had to shoot oxen and carry the meat. And if your axle broke, you'd have to find a replacement, and people would die from cholera and all types
dysentery,
you know.
I remember it.
I don't think I ever completed it, but I'm hoping the things in Oregon are, you know, a bit more advanced than these days.
Things have improved a little bit.
A little bit. Okay.
We have street lights and things now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, actually, you can go see the remnants of the Oregon Trail.
Oh,
still.
Really? It's a finish line.
Well, there are places where they're more or less undisturbed, and you can see the wagon wheel ruts and that sort of thing. It's kind of cool, really.
I love that. And I would generally, if I was to go to Oregon, I'd go exactly to that spot. It's
a cool thing to see. It really is.
So have you been in Oregon your whole life, or you just moved there recently?
No, we moved. Well, actually, I moved out of college. I came up to Southern Oregon to teach high school, teach English. And then I moved back to California. But then when I retired, or at least theoretically retired, apparently I'm not very good at that. About 7 or 8 years ago, we came back to, in this case, a different area, Central Oregon coast.
So you're done with the teaching, or do you dip in and out of it now and again?
I haven't for a long time. I taught high school English, like I said, and then I taught college writing courses for a long, long time, even while I was doing other things. You know, if you get old enough, you get to have multiple careers. So I did other things while I continued to teach. But since I retired 7 or 8 years ago, I have not done any teaching, just concentrated on writing, I guess.
So let's talk about that. You've been writing a number of books over the years. You've got, how many is it to date that you've got out there?
6, I think.
Six books, all about maritime disasters?
Except for one. I was the editor of a computer magazine, so I was kind of a techie. And I wrote a technology book called Leveling the Playing Field. But that was my one foray out of the nautical genre.
Okay.
The first 2 books...
I was going to say, if we get done talking about all the other 5 books, there might be a bit of time towards the end of the show where we change the name from Deck Tales to Tech Tales.
I like that.
Okay.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah. I like that a lot.
But so you about to say the 2 books you've got.
The first 2 books I did, I never know quite whether I should count them as books I had written, because what I did is I took existing classic books, both nautical books, and I annotated them, which is, in fact, sort of how I got started. Most sailors, serious sailors, have read a book by Joshua Slocum called Sailing Alone Around the World. And my wife and I were in a Barnes & Noble one night, and I was leafing through their edition of this book of his. And I was thinking, I had read it because I was a sailor, but I thought, this is a great book, but it's full of archaic language and nautical language, and it's not going to have as wide an audience as it really deserves. And my wife said, I said, somebody should annotate it. And my wife said, well, go ahead.
So you put your own spin on it.
I did. Basically, I wrote commentary to sort of add explication and context to his words. You know, he's writing from another century and a very different time, you know, a time when the sun really did not set on the British Empire. And that was reflected in, various hierarchies, including, gender hierarchies. So it was an interesting book to comment on. And then the publisher said, well, we'll do another one. So I did a commentary on Richard Henry Dana's 2 Years Before the Mast, which actually sold better, partly, I guess, because it's still taught in schools.
Oh, it's on the curriculum.
Usually unofficially. Usually it's a recommended reading rather than a required reading. But as far as sales goes, that's still good for me. And it was a great book. I loved that book, which is why I chose it.
It's recommended reading in what class? Obviously, I'm assuming English, but hey, let's not assume. It could be drama. They could be doing it in plays.
They could be. It's very common in English, but also in lots of social studies classes.
Oh, really?
Because there's a lot of history in the book, especially early American history, the southern part of the continent that was Mexico at the time he was sailing,
right? But
eventually became part of the United States. So there's a lot going on in that book, and it was fun to comment on. It's always good to try to explain various, what was then a contemporary reference, but now seems kind of oblique. It's good to be able to explain those, and it's fun. It's fun to write that stuff.
Well, you say it's fun, but when you going back when you started to do these things, and you saying like you turned your hand to, like, after you did the annotation and you did another one and then you went and did another one and so on, essentially you've dug your heels in and said, this is my speciality, shipwrecks. And you must have told people at some point that, hey, I'm specializing in this. Did anybody ever tell you, like, hey, this is a bit morbid? And you were just like,
Not yet. No. But then again, I've really only written 2 shipwreck books. And I do that, well, partly it's geography, partly it's where I live. I live right almost smack in the middle of what has come to be called the graveyard of the Pacific.
Right.
There's about 2,000 shipwrecks in this area.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not going to run out of shipwrecks.
Yeah.
My publisher likes shipwreck stories, and it makes sense that they would, because a shipwreck story has got this built-in narrative arc. It's it's going to happen. It's not going to be good. So the challenge lies in writing a compelling version of a story that your readers know where it's going to go, but you got to keep them interested anyway.
Absolutely.
And there's lots of things that I like to try to do to accomplish that. But if they did ask me, isn't that kind of a morbid sort of setting? I don't think I would think that. I would think that it's more of a dramatic setting.
Absolutely.
And I'm a writer, and as it happens, I've sort of ended up in this niche a little bit, and I like it. It's because it's interesting. The research is interesting. The writing is interesting. When you write, you always learn. And so I've learned a lot writing these last couple of books. Well, you learn when you write any book. So,
yeah. Well, so when did you start your writing journey?
Oh, gosh. I wrote my first magazine article in 1984.
Okay.
It's like almost back to the Oregon Trail days.
Yeah, just on the cusp or the tail end of it, yeah?
I was teaching school and I was working on a master's degree, and I wrote an article, and this magazine called and said, "Hey, we'll publish this. We'll give you this much money." And I said, "Money? Absolutely. Send it." And then eventually I became an editor, in theory, for a large textbook publisher. And along the way, I started to write freelance stuff. And eventually I was very much into technology for lots of different reasons, but I started freelancing for a computer magazine. That magazine was called Smart Computing, and it had been around for 40 years. And eventually they called and said, "Do you want to be the editor of this magazine?" And I said, "Sure, I'll do that." And so I spent the last 15, 20 years of my working career writing and editing. So it's been a long journey, but it's you couldn't call it an overnight success sort of thing. It's something I've been doing and teaching other people to do for a very long time.
I don't think I know of any overnight success stories, really. I mean,
not real ones, no.
Unless you go on a game show and win $1 million or something. That's different. That's a monetary gain. That's different in terms of financial, whatever. But in terms of success in a specialist subject or being proficient in a sport, then it never is just overnight. There's so much work that goes into it. Did you grow up reading stories about shipwrecks and things? Was that something
I grew up
later?
Well, I grew up reading everything.
Okay.
I read all the time. I actually flunked the 5th grade.
What? You can do that?
I do. You can do that even in Los Angeles, which is where I was in school. I did it because I read all the time, even including during math and PE and everything else. So I just always loved to read, and I always, from a very young age, wanted to write. And I'm one of the lucky ones. I got to do something I love to do and made a living at it, and I'm still doing it.
I didn't know it was possible, though, just to go backwards, to flunk.
You can,
school.
They can keep you back. It was pretty rare, but it can happen. Well, at least it used to happen. Whether it can happen now, I don't know.
Not over here. Not since. Well, I don't know if it ever was a case studied back here, but
right.
Yeah, certainly I was. I was never in the bottom set for anything, but I was always in the average or the middle, classes for things. But if you were in the bottom set and you didn't do well in that, you weren't going to have to go back to the beginning and start all over again. It wasn't enforced.
That didn't happen. Yeah, it used to be here in the States.
Yeah.
Back in the day.
Was it to do with your GPA, your grade point average?
Not really. I did so poorly in every other subject.
It dragged you down.
Really, in good conscience, I don't know how a teacher could have passed me.
Right. Yeah.
So actually, I'm glad. I still remember her name, by the way. I'm glad she flunked me because it kind of clicked the gear into place, and I thought, I'm not stupid, and I don't think so. I'm going to work harder at this, and it took several years, but I became a pretty good student.
But so, because you've written all of this stuff about maritime history, are you yourself in any capacity? Have you ever worked at sea?
No. In fact, I'm not even sure I would call myself much of a sailor. I was very much into sailing when we lived in San Diego. And of course, we had great opportunities to sail.
Mm.
But then I had actually started a software company. I accidentally became a software developer for a while. And I didn't mean to, but it happens. And a company in Nebraska bought my company, and I was part of the deal. So in Nebraska, you're pretty much smack in the middle of the U.S. There's no ocean, so not much opportunity for sailing.
Not much.
So I've never been in any kind of certainly not commercial nautical environment.
So what was it that sparked your interest in maritime history? If you didn't have a particular, like, easy access to it and you never really went along and did it, was there a particular incident that started?
Well, I have nonetheless always loved boats
Right.
and boating. And so I've been on as many as possible and learned as much as possible as I could about them. And then when the opportunity came to annotate a couple of nautical books, it just sort of led me into that area. And I'm glad it did because I like that area. So, but now I live on the coast. I'm literally, if I step outside my door, I'm 150 yards from the ocean.
Oh, sick.
It's a beautiful place to live. And honestly, now I'm getting a little long in the tooth here. I wish I had done more sailing when I was younger and was probably physically, better capable of it. Although you never know. I wrote a book called Sailing by Starlight.
Yes.
Which is about a geography professor from New Jersey, nonfiction again, who sailed around the world. And he did it with no instruments at all. No sextant, no compass. He didn't even take a wristwatch. So it was a great story. And he had lots of near misses, as one would expect. Things went wrong, but he got out of it a lot, which I think is typical of sailors to find their way out of trouble.
Uh-huh.
But he was 66 when he left, when he headed around the world, 68 when he got back, remarried at 90.
So what's the retirement age in the States?
65 generally.
Yeah, so he'd literally been 1 year into retirement and he thought, that's it, I'm going.
Exactly, and he'd always wanted to. In fact, he was quite an accomplished sailor before that. His name was Marv Creamer. And he said, well, I'm going to do this while I'm still young enough to do it.
Marv Creamer or Kramer?
Creamer.
Right,
like the stuff you pour in your coffee.
Okay, yeah. So
Right.
was that just you writing up Marv's story?
Essentially, yeah. But that story was almost literally dumped in my lap. You end up having to do a lot of research, especially on these shipwreck stories, and especially the ones that happened 100, 200, 150 years ago. Mm. But Marv's story literally came to me in a laundry basket.
How so?
I'm glad you asked that. His family basically called me through a friend of a friend that I used to be an editor with and said, my dad had this great story. He had just passed away in 2020.
Okay.
And he had a great story, and not many people have heard about it. I wonder if you'd be interested in writing a book about it. And I said, well, let me dig into it, and I'll tell you. I'll find out. And I looked it up, and I thought, this is a hell of a story. I don't know why people haven't told it before. And I went back and forth with them, and I said, well, I have to be honest with you. If I'm going to tell this story, I have to kind of tell it warts and all. It can't be a hagiography. I can't just pretend this guy was a saint, because he wasn't a saint. He wasn't a bad person, but he was imperfect like all of us. Mm-hmm. I said, but if you'll let me tell that story that way, I'd be happy to do it. And they said, absolutely. And to their credit, they never hassled with me about anything I said. And they literally sent me a laundry basket full of his notes and journals and logbooks and receipts. I don't think Marv ever threw anything away. All this primary source material, it's a gold mine for a researcher. I didn't really have to do much research. It was all in this basket. And then all I did was interview the surviving crew members that had been on the legs of the voyage with him.
So what was it he was sailing in?
He was in a 35-foot ketch. Well, actually, I guess it was a sloop, but smallish boat.
Okay. And was he
That's,
the captain, essentially?
oh yeah,
Right.
absolutely. That was that was one of the things that I had to talk about. Is he was pretty sure he was the captain, and he wanted to make sure you knew it.
Mm.
He was one of those guys. Then again, a 35-foot boat in the middle of the ocean is not a good place for a democracy. So somebody had to make snap decisions, even if they were wrong, and he was the man to do it. So
How many crew did he have on board?
he would have two or three, depending on which leg he was on.
So he mixed it up as he went along.
Yeah, yeah. He was. It was interesting because he basically would hit South Africa and place an ad in the local papers and say, "Hey, they're looking for a crew, no pay, bring your own gear, and you'll probably survive. I can't guarantee it. Meet me at this dock." And people showed up, mostly young people, and mostly people who, when you're 22, you pretty well feel you're invincible, and you want to see the world, and this is a heck of a way to get to see the world.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he found willing crew the whole way around.
That's a credible story. I love that. So, but he had no tech. It was all just over there, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much based on which way the birds were flying, what kind of fish he was catching, the direction of the swell, that sort of thing. Remember that he was a geographer.
Oh, was he?
So he taught geography at this college. So he had a pretty good handle on where things were in the world.
Still, once you get out into open water, then you get turned around so easily.
I would. I mean, I have no sense of direction at all.
I'd be lost without Google Maps.
It would be dangerous for me to go out. The times that I did sail, that we went out of sight of shore, I was terrified because if this skipper dies, I'm going to die too because I don't know where we are.
Mm.
But Marv could figure out based on storm swells and cloud movements, and it was a pretty incredible story. He did a great job. He brought himself home alive. So
Seems like a modern day Phineas Fogg.
a little bit, yeah, kind of like that. Only it took 2 years.
It took 2
Yeah,
years.
it wasn't 80 days. It was 2 years.
80 days.
Yeah.
God, well, that's cool though. Like, if they were going to make that into a film, who would play Marv? Do you reckon?
Lately, I'm of the opinion that Tom Hanks should star in everything.
Can do no wrong.
But I don't know. I could see a lot of. I guess Patrick Stewart's getting a little old, but he'd be good.
Is Marv American?
Marv is, yeah.
Well, Patrick can do. He can do an American
He
accent.
can do it. He's Patrick Stewart. He can do anything.
Yeah, yeah. Have you seen him in Ricky Gervais's TV show Extras?
Oh yeah, I think I have. Yeah.
When he's trying to picture James Bond type character that he plays, but he's basically a pervert and he keeps seeing women naked.
It happens.
Yeah. But if you haven't seen that, it's one of his funniest clips.
I'll have to. I guess I haven't seen it. I'll have to try.
It was a great show.
He played Ahab in one of my favorite versions of Moby Dick.
Oh, really? I've never seen that. I'm going to look that up right now. So I've got it.
I used to teach. I'd have students read Moby Dick and Jaws at the same time because they're basically the same story. And I would show this movie with Patrick Stewart in it.
1998. It's a TV miniseries.
That sounds like it was Patrick Stewart, right?
That's it. Yeah.
That must be the one. Yeah, he's a great actor, so he could do it.
He can do it. Was there anything that you've written out of the other books you've written that you were like, rather than having it dumped in your lap in a laundry basket, you came into it organically again, but you were like, aha, this needs a book. And so you jumped on it.
What tends to happen, given that I have a relationship with a publisher, is I will work with the acquisitions editor and she will say, why don't you pitch us some books? And once you're a known quantity and they know that you can write, and that you're going to write good material and you're going to be on deadline. They're eager to continue a relationship, which is good because I'm eager to continue a relationship with them.
Yeah.
And I will turn around and lately I've been saying, well, we got a lot of shipwreck stories. And I like shipwreck stories, and so do they. So I'm going to see which ones are really turn on that light for me. And so the next one after the Marv's story, which actually was the first shipwreck story, was the story of the Valencia.
Of the Valencia. Okay, I was going to get onto that, yeah.
And I think I picked it because it was just, well, they're all tragic.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean tragic really in a classical sense. It's not just, oh, this is such a sad story, which it is, but it's tragic in the Greek or Shakespearean sense, meaning that there's this tragic hero who ought to know better, and in fact does know better, but he's undone by some flaw. And on the Valencia, that was the captain. Lots of things went wrong, but they started with the captain. And he made mistakes that he really shouldn't have made. And lots of people died, including every woman and child on board that ship. And then you look at a story like that, and it's easy to look at it in hindsight and say, well, they should have done this, and they should not have done this. And anybody could tell you should have done this. But then again, they were under the sort of duress that you and I have probably never experienced. And I don't want to experience it. So it's easy to second guess them. But when you're telling their story, you have to be objective and open-minded and fair about it.
Yeah, you can't just call him a villain.
Exactly, because that's not fair. No. It's not true. He's not a villain. He made some stupid mistakes, and you wonder why. And the investigating committee also wondered why he did some things. I think when I talk about that book, I list like 7 things that went wrong. And almost all of them were attributable to missteps by Captain Johnson for whatever reason.
So negligence in human form, not
in
anything,
essence,
nothing to do with the currents or the stormy weather.
Well, the current, that's an interesting point, because one of their problems was the current, but he should have known about that current. There was a current called the Davidson Current that in the winter tends to flow north, and in the summer tends to flow south around Vancouver Island, British Columbia. And he should have known that, but he had only made one previous trip, and it was in a different time of year. So he did not expect the current to be working to his detriment, which it did. And in fact, he mistrusted his log, it's a little device you throw overboard, and it spins. And the rotation of the propeller you can use to count those rotations and figure out how fast your vessel is moving.
An actual log?
Yeah, well, it's not really a log. It's called a patent log. It looks like a little cylinder with a propeller on the end of it.
All right, okay. Because at first I thought it was like Captain's log, like a book, like a diary entry.
No. That's actually a confusing point. But
yeah,
anyway,
glad we cleared that up.
Yeah, he didn't believe it, and he should have believed it. In fact, I sometimes use an airplane analogy. Pilots are taught, and it's a very difficult lesson to learn, to trust their instruments. Above all, you cannot trust your gut. Not only can you sometimes not tell where east and west is, but you may not be able to tell up from down.
Well, yeah, and you can't just stick your finger out the window, wet your finger and go, which way is the wind going?
And if you're scuba diving, you can tell which way the bubbles are going, so you can tell where up is.
Yeah.
But in an airplane, you may not be able to do that. So you're supposed to trust your instruments, and good pilots learn to do that, and so do good sailors.
Yeah.
But
unless you're Marv Creamer and you ain't got none.
Exactly. The captain of the Valencia mistrusted this device. He said it was overrunning, meaning it was indicating that he was traveling more at a greater speed than he really was. But in reality, he really was traveling at that speed. He was traveling faster than he thought, which is why he missed a turn eastward into the Strait of Juan de Fuca and just sailed right past that opening and ended up on the rocks 30 or 40 miles distant on Vancouver Island. So he made a lot of mistakes.
Yeah. This was the Davidson's current?
Davidson Current.
Davidson Current.
Johnson is the
Johnson
captain.
Is the captain. Davidson is the guy who, I guess, discovered the current?
He named the current, yeah.
Because he was the first on it?
Well, I don't know if he was the first on it, but he was probably the first to map it.
Yeah. I was going to say, has he got a book? Has he? Not something that you've had delivered to you in a laundry basket yet.
No.
But so the other one you wrote about, so the SS Valencia, was that one. It was famous in many ways because it went down. It was what exactly happened with that after the current mishap?
That ship was designed for southerly Atlantic routes, warm water routes, basically,
Mm.
down to South America and the Caribbean and all that. But it was brought to the Pacific Northwest in particular. And that was an environment for which it was not designed and in which it did not behave very well. It was, by that time it was a 20 plus year old ship anyway. It was starting to get a little beat up. And there are some violent storms on the Pacific coast.
Mm-hmm.
The Pacific is named because it looked peaceful the moment it was named, but it's not always peaceful at all. And it's huge. It's not just the largest ocean, but it's the largest geographic feature on Earth.
Yeah.
And so there are these vast stretches across which wind and waves can build. I guess mariners would call that a fetch, I think. That fetch is so long that the wind and the waves can build up to incredible heights and strengths. And so storms that occur can blow you onto the lee side of an island, in this case, Vancouver Island.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not made for that kind of weather. It was not very beamy. It was a very, very long bow, which means that a lookout on the bow is not going to be able to communicate very well with whoever's at the helm in the middle of a storm. This accident occurred in the dark, in the middle of a pretty strong storm.
What year was this?
1906.
Okay.
They had no radio. Very few ships at that time had radio. And the ship wrecked at exactly the wrong place. There was nothing, there still is nothing at that point on the west coast of Vancouver Island. If you go to Vancouver Island today, which I did, you have to go to Victoria and then hike 18 kilometers in a glorified game trail before you come to the spot where the ship was wrecked.
So
it's no, it was.
It's old wood, so it's eroded away.
It's pretty much gone. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still in the middle of nowhere. So there was no one to help them when that ship went on the rocks there. And then they did some more things that, looking back at it, you would think, well, if they hadn't have done that, they'd have been a lot better off. But then again, you weren't there. So
yeah, you weren't there. So that's what I was going to ask you, is actually, like, when you're doing your research for things like the SS Valencia, how challenging is it to trust these sources that you've got, these first-hand accounts? Obviously, Marv gave you his family gave you his personal hoarding collection of this and that. But you're going out, you're looking for things, so diaries, logs, written logs, not things you show over the side of the ship. Letters. Did any of these things that you pulled up, that you dug up when you were researching some of these ships, the Valencia and the SS Pacific,
right.
Did any of these entries or letters that you found surprise you in any way?
I shouldn't have been surprised to find conflicts, but I guess I was surprised. But there are conflicts. Like, for example, the Pacific. The captain of that ship was named Jefferson Davis Howell.
And this is another book you've written.
I'm in the middle of writing it now.
Okay.
He was named after the man who became the president of the Confederacy here in the then ununited States. And in fact, he was his brother-in-law. And there are little facts that you just assume that you're going to be able to grab, but you want to make sure they're correct. Well, I noticed that there was a discrepancy in his birth date. He was born, depending on where you read, either in 1841 or 1846. And so you go, well, it's not that important that it's right, but I don't want to be wrong. It's a 5-year difference. It makes him quite a young man, which makes his accomplishments, I suppose, a little more impressive, since he was younger than most.
Maybe it's taught in the South that he was a young man, and in the North he was a bit on the decline.
That could have been.
Because I know that where depending on where you are in the States, they teach certain parts of the Civil War history a little bit differently.
Very, very differently. Very differently. I have a funny story about that. Can I interrupt myself?
Yeah, you can do what you like.
Okay. When I was learning to be a teacher, I went to one of my former English teachers and I said, "Hey, can I sit in on and watch you teach your classes for a while?" And she said, "Sure." And then one day she said, "You want to teach a class?" And I said, "Yeah. What am I teaching?" She said, "Well, local color in literature, but especially as a result of the Civil War." So I said, "Okay, well,
local what color?
Local color." Writers like Bret Harte and Mark Twain, who were adept at giving the local color of their environment and that sort of thing.
I don't know Bret Harte, unless of course you're referring to the Hitman.
No, there's a hitman named Bret Harte. I didn't even know that.
Bret the Hitman Hart from the Wrestling Federation. You never heard of him?
You know, I don't watch a lot of wrestling. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Rod.
Not since I was about 8, anyway.
I mean, a lot of people would have heard Bret Hart, and
I understand, and I feel for those people.
No, it's okay, but it's good to sort of unpick people when say that's not this person you're thinking of, it's somebody else.
No, this is another guy.
Because if I thought it, somebody else might as well.
God, no, this is a different guy.
Okay.
Anyway, I gave a lecture on the causes of the Civil War in this class. And the entire time I'm giving this lecture on the causes of the Civil War, this teacher, whose name I forget, is sitting in the back room and she's knitting and shaking her head, knitting and shaking her head. And I keep glancing up at her, wondering what she's shaking her head about. And I finally finished, and she gets up and she says, "Okay, so Mr. Scher was all wrong about the causes of the Civil War. I'll tell you what the real causes were of the Civil War."
And just so anyone else, because I haven't called you by your surname up to this point, I just realized your surname is Mr. Scher.
Is Scher, yeah. Anyway, so apparently I don't know the causes of the Civil War. At least I didn't when I was 20. So.
Okay, yeah.
But that was a long time ago. And,
so she set you straight as far as she knew?
She I don't know. I was so embarrassed that I could just hear this roaring in my ear the rest of the class. And I don't think I ever went back to see her again. But I hope she's doing well.
Good to try to mend bridges, even though there's no bridge in sight.
I know. Anyway,
try to.
I found that this discrepancy in the date of Jefferson Davis Howell's birth date, 1841 or 1846, and some what I thought felt like fairly authoritative sources said it was 1841, and 1841 makes sense. But other people said, but he was in their sources. They would say he was such a young person for a captain, and I'd say, well, it's not that young. So I kept looking, and I found other places where they cited the date of 1946 or 1846. Mm-hmm. And so finally, I tracked down in old census records his age at a time when he was listed as a child living with his parents. Mm-hmm. And those dates corresponded more to the fact that he would have been younger and that his real birth date would have been 1846.
Okay.
So you dig around stuff and you find records like that. The internet is so helpful. You can't believe it, but it's a place but it's a place to start.
Yeah, it can also be very unhelpful.
Oh yeah, we democratized information, but we also democratized misinformation. So you got to be careful. But I used to tell students, they'd say, "Can we look at Wikipedia?" And I'd say, "Absolutely. Look at Wikipedia, but
as long as you look at the sources at the bottom."
Exactly. You go to the sources and see where their sources were, what their sources were, and read those.
Yeah, it was
don't ever cite Wikipedia.
I had another guy on a few weeks ago, Rich Jones, I think it was.
I know him. Yeah.
Is that how we've connected?
Yes, Richard Jones. He's written like 26 books.
Yeah, so
he's making me feel like a piker here.
Catch up, Rod.
I'm not that young.
No, yeah, sorry. Carry on.
I'm old enough to have written for newspapers and radio back in the day, long before internet. And so that makes me pretty damn old, I guess. Yeah. Thank you for nodding.
No, I'm sorry. I have a habit of tuning in and out and kind of doing the nod on autopilot when I'm trying to think of the next question. Sorry, Rod. That wasn't.
No. It's all right. I'm glad I got to be old. A lot of people don't get to be old.
This is very true, and what a wonderful way to turn it around in your favor.
That's right. That's right.
I hope I make it to the end of the. Well, I'm way past the 27 club.
Yeah. Oh, good. Good. That's something. Yeah.
I've just completed the 37 club because I turned 38 the other week.
Wow.
So next milestone for me is, well, when life essentially begins at the age of 40.
Exactly.
So we'll hopefully get there in time. What's the biggest differences between the Pacific and the Valencia?
Oh, gosh. Well, more people died in the Pacific, including every woman and child, but we didn't even know who those people were because in 1875, when the Pacific went down, they were not really good about keeping track of who got on the ship and who bought a ticket and who just slipped the purser $10 or whatever it was.
Mm.
There was a lot of gold on the Pacific because it was transporting miners and bankers back and forth from a gold rush in British Columbia. And that gold is still there, maybe. There are people trying to salvage it even as we speak. And I've been talking to them. But I suppose the biggest difference is that Pacific went down because, well, somebody made one mistake, and because there was a lot of greed involved that ended up in that ship being on the water when it really should not have been. But there was money to be made, so it was on the water.
Yeah.
It wasn't really shipshape. It wasn't sound. It wasn't ready to be on the ocean. And so when it hit a sailboat, because of a sailboat captain's error, caved in part of the bow, and the ship, the Pacific, went down within 10 or 15 minutes. It sank very quickly, and everyone except two people died. So statistically, it's a much worse accident.
Yeah.
And in fact, I suppose it's the worst accident in the Pacific. Still, about 300 people died.
Mm.
In the case of the Valencia, it was sort of more of a tragedy because, there's this cascade of errors. I guess is one way to look at, what brings you to disaster. And the Valencia went down because the captain made a series of mistakes, and then some other people made a couple of mistakes. So it was errors all the way down. Whereas in the case of the Pacific, it was just basically one error and greed that meant a ship that really shouldn't have been in service was in service.
Mm.
So it's hard to say which one's more tragic.
Yeah, of course. Well, if it's mostly bankers on board, then I'd say.
Oh, but there are also some miners. There was a lot of women and children. Come on.
Of course. Good and the bad.
Now, if it were lawyers.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, okay.
Was there any human interest stories on either ships that really kind of in your research?
Ton of them. In fact, that's what makes, we were talking earlier about how, these are stories where the reader knows what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So your job as the writer is to come up with a compelling way to tell the story. Well, that's one way to do it, is to point out the human interest stories. On the Pacific, you have a young woman. She was 17, and she was kind of a society belle.
What, you mean like Rose in Titanic?
A little like Rose in Titanic. Yeah. There was no door, and if there had been a door, she might have survived, I guess.
I hope.
Her body washed up within sight of her home.
What?
Yeah, her body floated across a part of the ocean. She drowned, and then up the Strait of Juan de Fuca, about 40 miles, and then washed ashore within walking distance of where she lived with her parents. So you have a human interest, and that's an incredibly painful, I guess, depending on how you want to paint it. I mean, you could get overly sappy about these things, and I'm probably sappier than I need to be. But that's a sad thing.
Oh yeah, you step outside to water the petunias, and
exactly.
There's my daughter.
There she is. Oh yeah, and that's a. And there was a horse troop, equestrian troop, excuse me, on the ship on the Pacific. They all died, including all the horses.
Mm.
There was a woman whose child tripped and then was crushed by some falling people, and she gathered up his corpse and took it with her into a lifeboat, and then that lifeboat capsized, as all of them did, and so she died holding the corpse of her son.
They
I
all
mean, it was
capsized. They all capsized. What, because
in this
everyone was...
particular case, in both these cases, the passengers got in the way of the officers or crew trying to deploy the lifeboats, which is not an easy thing to do, especially back then.
Don't you hate when that happens?
You do. At least I do. And they all capsized because they were deployed incorrectly. So they either capsized or they were crushed against the side of the ship. And the exact same thing happened with the Valencia. And for some of the same reasons, the crew, in both cases, neither crew was trained how to deploy the lifeboats, where to muster, how to help the passengers get on the lifeboats. I don't know if you've ever taken a cruise, but if you do take a cruise...
I worked in the cruise industry for 4 years.
Oh, all right. So you know that one of the very first things they do is have some kind of mustering.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that both the crew's already been well trained, but the passengers know where to go in the event of an emergency and what to do. And the crew, if there are any new crew, they've been trained. Well, that was not done in either of these cases.
Of course.
And it should be done, and it should be done as early as possible for obvious reasons.
Do you know when they implemented that and when they started making it mandatory?
I don't know. SOLAS would have been 1975, but before that, there were, in the 1870s, they started not really the cruise industry, because that didn't quite exist, but the steamship industry started to pass laws about, well, if you're going to carry this many passengers and you're going to do it for money, you have to do these safety things. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that one of them was you got to tell people how to get on the lifeboats, and you have to carry the right number of lifeboats. The Pacific was only carrying lifeboats with a capacity of 160 people, but there were close to 300 people on board. So even had the lifeboats been deployed, it wouldn't help that much. Yeah. So, it's a tragedy all around. Unfortunately, tragedies make good stories.
They do indeed. But so you're not just telling the stories that are tragic. In your books, you're not just writing, and then this person died, and then this person died, and then this person didn't do their job, so that person died. You're balancing technical detail with the human narrative. How do you walk that tightrope between writing about the engineering, the nautical detail, and compelling storytelling?
I think and maybe this comes out of annotating books and having read... my first annotated books were the annotated Frankenstein and the annotated Dracula. I loved those books. Coming out of them, you sort of learn the value of adding context. And I think if when you tell the shipwreck story, if all you do is tell the shipwreck story, you're missing half the story. Because I think it's imperative and much more interesting to explain to readers what was going on in the world at the time. What were these people like? Where were they? What were they doing? What did they believe? Where was the technology that might or might not have impacted this shipwreck at the time? So, for example, in the Valencia, I kind of think that sort of, maybe people think of it as minutia or something, but I think it's fun to know and to talk about that stuff. In the Valencia, there were, I think, 40 or 50 ocean liners at the time. Again, this was 1906, that had radios. But the Valencia, which had been described as a second-class ship under the command of a second-class captain, which sounds cruel, but it's probably true.
Red flags all round.
Yeah, exactly. Did not have a radio. But of course, most ships did not have radios in those days. Yeah. A few years later, the Titanic did have radios. And in fact, in 1910, which is when some of these laws started to be passed about safety at sea, the Radio Act said, well, if you're going to carry this many people, you have to have a radio set on board. And it has to have a backup. And you have to have a trained radio man, and he has to have a backup. And in fact, that saved a lot of lives with the Titanic.
I heard on another podcast, Sail Away podcast, the other day that they didn't have their Morse code like machine or whatever it was, the radio room wasn't working on the Titanic, and then like the guys who were in charge of it, they were working through the night, and they got it fixed the day before or so the Titanic went down. So had they not fixed that, they would never have been able to send a beacon, and nobody would have been found.
Yeah, that's a great piece of that story that doesn't really get told.
Exactly, yeah. Context is everything,
but it's an interesting story,
the minutiae,
and it's another case of you tend to think about near misses, but if you're writing about shipwrecks, things went wrong. So you're really talking about near misses, things that almost went right, but in this case did not. Well, in the case of the radio crew working through the night to make sure that their radios were working, that turned the tide, that turned the tables.
Yeah. What was some of the near misses? Some of the near misses that happened on the Valencia or the Pacific?
Oh, the Valencia was carrying a device called a Lyle gun.
Lyle?
A Lyle gun, Lyle, named after a guy named Lyle.
Who'd have thought?
Yeah, who'd have thought? And a Lyle gun is basically a small cannon, and it's meant for shooting line from the ship to a shore or from the shore to the ship. And the idea is you shoot a line to the shore, and then somebody makes it fast, and then you tie a heavier line to that line and pulls it across. Eventually, you get to the point where you've got a big, thick hawser kind of line going across from the ship to the shore. And then you can use a bosun's chair or other device to start hauling people across. Well, the story is that they got 2 boatloads of people saved from the ship onto the shore, and those 2 groups climbed the cliff and ended up on a trail above, overlooking the wreck. And one group went east and one group went west, understandably, looking for help. But then they started firing the Lyle gun from the ship, but there's nobody left to make the line fast.
On the other end?
Yeah, because these people left. Now, had one of the groups stayed, or even if they had just said, look, you guys, you don't have shoes. Well, some of the people didn't have shoes. You two don't have shoes anyway. You don't want to hike across looking for help. You guys stay here, see if you can be of any help. If they had done that, they could have almost certainly saved more people. Maybe not everybody,
but more.
But more. That was a near miss. That was that they almost had it. And Johnson, or the captain himself, some of his mistakes were sort of near misses. When the second officer said, I think you're wrong about the log overrunning. I think we really are moving this fast. So I don't think that lighthouse that you just saw and wrote down is the lighthouse you think it is. Instead of letting his pride get the better of him, which happens in tragedies, he could have said, maybe you're right. Let's slow down and double check this. But he didn't do that.
Yeah.
And on small things like that hang these tragedies, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I came out of a journalism background, and I think that really served me well. And one of the things that sort of gets drilled into you is you can't be wrong. You can write poorly, especially if you're in a rush. You probably will write poorly someday, but you can't be wrong. So have your facts straight, double check them, triple check them. If your mother tells you she loves you, get a second source on that.
The reviewer commentary says the loss of the Valencia was avoidable and that the drift and currents played a critical part, which we've established. To what extent do you believe the disaster stems from hubris or human confidence versus pure bad luck? Like, so if you're going to give it like a 50-50 percentage, which way are you leaning? Mostly the captain, right?
Yeah, definitely. I don't think... I'm sure that there will be seagoing types who disagree with me, and they probably know more than I do about going to sea, but I don't believe that luck plays much of a part. I believe that if you're prepared and you have safety systems in place and you adhere to them, you will almost always come out of it okay. The ocean is not malevolent. It's not out to get you, but it will kill you if you're unprepared or you're too proud to realize just how strong it is and how weak you are. You can very easily not come home.
She's a cruel mistress.
It is, exactly. There used to be an old pre-Coast Guard motto. They used to say, you have to go out, but you don't have to come back.
Oh, that is bleak.
Yeah, I know.
I sometimes I don't know what it was or where I heard it, but like, and this is like I guess something that I can work into my next question. But I used to hear people saying that old people go on cruise ships because, like seagulls, they go out at sea to die, which is
I don't even know why I find that funny
because it
as a
does.
fellow old person.
Well, remember, it does sound like it's half true, but it's like, do seagulls go to sea only to die? Because they're land based, aren't they? You don't see
Yeah,
us.
I
You don't see
guess.
sea. You don't see seagulls out at
No,
sea.
when you do see a seagull, if you're Marv Creamer, for example, you know you're close to land.
Yes, but then I looked it up, and apparently seagulls do not go to sea to die, and that is an
No,
urban myth. But but
figures.
but old people certainly do in in
Well,
many cases.
I don't know why they go to sea. And it's funny that you work in the cruise industry because I would not get on a cruise ship for love nor money.
I knew
It does
those
not
words.
appeal to me. I know it does not appeal to me at all. I used to have to go to tech conferences in Las Vegas, and I would enjoy it because once a year I'd go to this tech conference like Comdex or one of those, and it would remind me how much I hate Las Vegas.
Mm.
And I tend to think of like going on a sea cruise. It's not even what it's called, is it?
A cruise.
A cruise. It just seems like being you're in a giant hotel, except you can't get off.
Well, yeah,
Uh,
there's that. But then, so just going paddling backwards. So when I said about the old people and going to sea to die, um, were there any myths or accepted truths about either of those disasters that you had to unlearn or debunk in your work?
you know, the only real myth I found was that people believe they can be prepared, 100% prepared, that you can prepare for everything. And I don't think you can. And eventually, it comes down to, well, if this layer of protection is ripped away and this layer of protection is ripped away, or if you use that Swiss cheese model that people have talked about of security, then if you discard those, then what do you do? And you have to prepare for, well, what do I do when everything fails? So I think that the only myth I really encountered is that people believe that they can be prepared. And I'm not sure you can be 100% prepared. Not with something as powerful and as large as the ocean.
Mm. Well, yeah, like we did drills on a weekly basis, and then sometimes we'd do another one in the middle of the week just for fun. You know, it would be a different kind of drill. It'd be fire, it'd be bomb threat, it'd be whatever. And then like never really getting the chance to put it into practice. You're like almost a little bit like, well, you know, if shit did hit the fan, how would I have reacted? I mean,
Right.
it's a question of, oh, if only I had this happen so I could get tested. But then I guess, you know, some people were unlucky and others unlucky.
And do you really want to be tested? I guess. I don't know.
Well, within reason, I guess. If if,
Uh,
if 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 I had my pick of disasters to choose from, I would have liked to have been on the Concordia.
yeah. Now, I don't remember the specifics about the Concordia.
Well, it took a while to
But
sink, and it was
it's
it was swimming distance from the shoreline.
it's certainly more modern. But we have a lot of modern examples of. Do you remember reading about that? I guess it was a British yacht, but it capsized and sank off the coast of Italy recently, like last year or something. It keeled over. It was one of those big mega yachts, and it keeled over 90 degrees, which shouldn't be a problem. I mean, those things are meant to be able to right themselves. But I guess someone had left some hatches open. So when it heeled over, water starts to pour in, and now enough weight builds up, and you can't right yourself. The water's just going to keep pouring in, and sure enough, it's going to sink. That's a good example of there's this watertight hatch, there's this safety device mechanism in place, but someone either didn't use it or misused it or forgot about it because people are flawed.
Hmm.
So it's what happens.
Do you treat these ships that you've researched as characters in their own rights with personalities, choices, and vulnerabilities?
I don't think I do. And again, longtime seagoers may disagree with me because sailors often ascribe to their vessels personality traits and things like that, and they call their vessels she and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's been going on for 1,000 years, but I don't view them that way. I really don't. I think of the ship as the stage on which the play plays out, the play takes place. Yeah. And I don't think of the ship itself. It's a mechanical contrivance, and it's either in good shape or bad shape.
Yeah.
But I don't ascribe to it any personality traits.
No. I mean, no. There are those who might. I don't know what, if you could ascribe any traits, which ones you would use. Leaky.
Yeah, both of these ships were old, battered girls. In the case of the Pacific, she was literally rotten.
Oh, really?
And you could shovel out her timbers, and which is why I say it shouldn't have been on the water at all. But again, that's not you're using a metaphor to describe the physical condition of the ship. That's all.
Yeah, no, I guess so, but that's fine. Cool. Did you ever hit a brick wall in your research anywhere, and you just had a real writer's block? How did you get past it?
I thought the date of birth of Jefferson Davis Howell was going to turn out to be a block, and I would have had to write around it. I would have had to I would have felt like I was cheating. I would have said his date of birth is disputed, but eventually I think I've narrowed that down.
You were like,
sometimes
no, I've got to be right.
If I say something, I want it to be right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't say it.
Full disclosure, I mean, if I say something that isn't, I can always change it in the edit.
That's true. That's good. But I have to wait till a second edition of the book, I guess.
Well, yeah. If I say something that I'm like, where did that come
right?
from? Yeah.
Did I make that up?
I've got to fact check myself before I put that online. Because I don't like to publish misinformation and add to the problem if I can help it.
I probably hit brick walls on, for example, looking up information on some of the, I almost said survivors, but there weren't any, people who went down with the Pacific, because I just couldn't find any more information about them. So I just didn't say much about them.
Which one was it that had two survivors?
That's the one that had two, and I spoke about them, and I spoke about 6 or 7 others that I could find information about. But that leaves 180 people. Yeah. So
difficult. Was there a favorite gem you uncovered, a detail that no one else had ever published, or an image, letter, log that gave you the chills?
No.
Okay, easy one.
I mean, that date of birth, straightening that out was a little bit of a gem, but other than that, no.
If you had the skills, I mean, this is a stupid question because they were wooden ships and they've all rotted away. I was going to say, do you ever fantasize about diving to one of these wrecks yourself, if permitted? But
well, some shit like the Valencia had a steel hull.
Oh yes.
So
would you be up for that, or not particularly?
No, because I went scuba diving once. It didn't go well.
Oh really?
It was not pretty. I didn't. My ears started to hurt at about 30 feet.
Yep.
And then this large, really scary eel came out of a rock and tried to kill me.
I need to remember that question to be put in because I'm actually interviewing a woman called Jen in a couple of weeks' time. She's a shipwreck scuba diver.
Oh, I think it would be an incredible thing to do, but I don't want to do it. But I don't want to skydive either. So,
They're very different.
They both could end up in death for me.
Yeah, but in scuba, you go down pretty much with the tank and you're the one kicking yourself around.
Yeah. You go down with a parachute.
You go down with a parachute, but you're going in tandem with somebody else who's in charge of making it open and landing.
I know a guy who froze, and he never did open his chute. His automatic chute opened, and he got down on the ground, put his chute away, and never went again.
Oh wow!
That would be scary.
What froze?
He froze. He couldn't reach his ripcord.
Oh, okay. Probably should have gone during the summertime.
I don't think it would have helped.
Let's lighten the mood. Let's see. So some of these questions I've got, I think we more or less because we just
happy shipwrecks.
There's no such thing.
Yeah,
If there is, I don't know, man. Unless it was like you said, the only way a shipwreck could be happy was if it was like full of lawyers, or it was potentially Trump was on
you're gonna
board
get
or
sued
something.
here.
If Trump was on board or something like that, I don't know what your stances
Oh,
are.
don't even tempt me.
Do you know the comedian Bill Burr?
Mm.
He's a big name. He had this comedy bit about if he was like, a dictator or if he was in charge of things, he knows how to solve the problem of overpopulation. And he would just chuck a bunch of surplus people on a cruise ship and then sink the ship. Because ultimately, he said, the worst people in the world are those who go on a cruise ship. They come off, they come home, you talk to them, hey, how was your trip? And they're like, yeah, it was amazing. We ate so much food. They had a chocolate fountain. We had cheese, melted cheese. It's just the most basic.
They had a pool.
Yeah, they had so many basic things. And you're just like, who needs these people? You just sink them in the ocean. No one's going to miss them. That was what he was getting at. But Bill Burr, recently, I think he just massively undermined himself because he's always been this pillar of integrity, hasn't he?
Yeah, now he's into the Saudi thing.
Now he's going to the Saudi thing. So obviously, when this comes out, well, that'll be months down the line. Who knows if he takes that money that he makes from the Saudi thing and he does loads of good with it. If
that's the only way he could redeem himself, I think.
That's it, right? Or if he manages to take that money, somehow buy himself into power to become some kind of dictator, and then act out his terrible fantasy of sinking a cruise ship with some of the worst people in the world. Then it would be
But the crew is also on board.
Yeah, this is the argument that you've got.
Damn.
It's like, I don't know if you've ever seen.
Oh well.
Have you ever seen Kevin Smith's films?
I don't know.
Kevin Smith.
I mean, I may have.
He did Clerks. It's that whole debate about.
I think I've seen Clerks years ago.
There's a line in that film which is like, what really upsets me is that when they were building the Death Star and it blew up, there had to be tons of contractors working on that thing when it blew up. You think the average stormtrooper knows how to install a toilet main? Come on. So yeah, in a nutshell, there's no such thing as a happy disaster.
Shipwreck. Yeah, I guess
Shipwreck or whatever. But with all your work on the Valencia and the Pacific and the research you did, it's usually, like you said, a cascade of problems. It's never just one thing. It's negligence of this, but there are other factors to consider. What lessons do we draw from in history when we look at maritime disasters in general?
I suppose it's no different from any other kind of disaster, but maritime disasters are going to occur when, there's this Swiss cheese model of lining up the holes in the Swiss cheese. And if they line up, well, either perfectly or imperfectly, depending on how you want to look at it, if the holes go through, then a disaster can ensue. And I think what we learn is that left to their own devices, those holes will eventually line up, and bad things will happen unless you take concrete, repeatable steps to ensure that whatever mechanisms you have in place are really there and are really functioning correctly. And that could mean people, in addition to systems and things like that. So I think what we learn is there are points of failure, and almost all of them are ultimately attributable to human beings.
Well said. Yeah, we're to blame. No, Mother Nature can take a day off. What about culture? How does culture play a part?
I suppose culture would play a part if, because like in any company, for example, it's a top-down sort of thing. If your work culture, and it could be maritime work, is sloppy, lazy, or imprecise, then that's going to follow. People on down the hierarchy are going to act the same way they see the next person above them acting. So I suppose that if it's a sloppy culture, it's going to be a sloppy operation, and that's going to lead you to disasters of one sort or another.
Yeah, yeah, most definitely. I think, like I was saying, we did these drills a lot of the time, and the culture was always like, oh, dread, dreariness, like, oh, we have to do this shit, even though we've got one of the easiest sailing routes around the Mediterranean and the Canaries, right? So we were all getting complacent. And, the captain and the staff captain and many of these ships, they were like, we don't care. We don't think that just because it's an easy route, it should ever just be taken lightly because anything can happen. Sod's law,
Oh,
you
and
know.
it has. So
But yeah, we live and learn, as you say.
complacency is a good term. That's complacency is probably something we have to fight against because it's easy to become complacent. So
What do you think are the more underappreciated, the biggest underappreciated hazards in sea travel out there? So currents, record keeping, fatigue, misinformation, even climate change. That's a big one
well,
that,
I suppose they can all play a part, but again, you're supposed to be planning for them.
yeah.
So each one of those things that you just mentioned could have been mitigated or should be have been mitigated by some system or mechanism or operation that you have in play. Weather shouldn't be a surprise. Are you keeping an eye on the weather? Of course you are. You better be. Are you going to try and squeeze through a tumultuous storm because you are in a hurry? Well, now you're getting sloppy. You're taking a risk. And if you want to risk your life, that's one thing, but you're risking the rest of your crew and all of your passengers. And so, I doubt very much that a professional captain would do that. A pirate might,
Oh, most definitely.
if we know
I'll,
any pirates.
I'll have to go back and ask Captain Tones.
Yeah.
What would you advise modern ship captains, regulators, or designers to remember from the past? I think the obvious ones, kind of like what you just said, slow is fast, fast is slow. There's no need to rush.
And I think designers know that. The incidence of serious maritime accidents is going down. And the reason the way I know that is because I first started thinking about airline incidents, and I was watching and reading up on a lot of airliner investigations, accident investigations, and they're very, very thorough, and they jump right in. Depending on which country you're in, it'll be a different branch of the government, but somebody is always there to jump right in and figure out, well, how did this happen? And what they want to do, obviously, is find out how it happened as a way to avoid it happening in the future.
Mm.
And I thought, well, if that's the case, then serious airline incidences ought to be going down. And sure enough, they are. It's a fairly steady decline. It's not precipitous, but it's a slow, steady decline in bad accidents. For that reason, they're getting better and better as they go at determining what caused the accidents and finding ways to work around that.
Mm.
And the same thing should be happening, and I'm sure is happening with the maritime. You find a ship that sinks well, we were talking earlier about the two yachts that sank.
I was just trying to think of those.
They
Yeah.
they built systems into those vessels to ensure that they would not capsize and die and sink. And yet they did, and they did because people were were the ultimate problem. The system was fine if it, in fact, were maintained as designed and used as designed.
I didn't ask you enough about that, to be honest, because I was, well, distracted. But the system in place to prevent it from capsizing, do you know much about that? How does it stop it from capsizing?
Well, it'll capsize, but it's self-righting.
Right.
Most sailboats are, with the exception of a catamaran or a trimaran.
Yeah,
But they're much harder to flip in the first place. But
absolutely. Yeah.
if you do flip them, you're not going to get them back up by yourself. But a typical monohull of any size can be self-righting. That's why there's a very heavy keel. That's why there's ballast. In the event of the British boat that capsized and sank off the coast of Italy, it had a movable keel, and for whatever reason, they had the keel retracted. I'm not sure why they would do that, because you want that weight low.
The keel is what exactly?
It was retracted. It was pulled back up.
What is the keel for those who don't know?
Well, the keel is the portion of the hull that sticks deeply below the water and is usually heavily weighted to stabilize the vessel.
Yeah.
So if it's down, keeping the center of gravity very low, even if the vessel flips 90 degrees, even more than 90 degrees, even if the mast ends up underwater a little bit, it'll still right. But in this case, they had the keel retracted, so the righting moment was not where it should have been. The thing was not going to pull itself back up. And even if it had been able to, since the hatches were left open, when it went over, it started to fill with water.
Yeah.
So it was, by the time it keeled over 90 degrees, it was done. There were systems in place that people either misused or ignored. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like that submersible, that Titanic deep submersible that just imploded.
The Titan, was it called?
Titan, yeah.
The Titan was the name of the submersible heading down. Yeah.
What was that guy's name? Brockton or something? Stockton.
Yeah.
There were systems in place to avoid exactly what happened, and he simply did not participate in those systems.
Yeah, he was too far gone.
Talk about hubris.
Yeah.
That's a really good example of a tragedy ensuing because one guy thought he was smarter than the system. And he was smart, but apparently not as smart as he thought he was.
No. Yeah. That was a big no-no.
Even if you got tools, mechanical contrivances, let's say, that are meant to ensure your safety, and those contrivances fail, it's still almost never, the disaster is still rarely caused by actual mechanical contrivance failing. Someone failed to maintain it, or someone failed to operate it correctly, or maybe someone just designed it poorly. Either way, there's a human being at the core of the failure. And we see that with shipwrecks all the time. Less and less, but it'll never go away. In fact, I suppose as they become more and more complicated,
the chance of them is even greater, you'd say?
You would think. I would think.
With these new cruise ships that have just come out, the Royal Caribbean ones, the biggest in the world, would you ever be tempted to go on board?
No. I'd go with you if you could show me around, maybe, but I don't think I'd want to. Well, it's not a place that I would enjoy.
I never worked on the big ones. I mean, the big one I worked on was like what, 3,000 guests. It was a Carnival ship, but that was
that's a lot of.
It's a lot of people still.
It's a lot of overweight people.
Exactly, Carnival guests, but the Walmart of the sea. They that's what they get nicknamed apparently, because they are literally,
I like that.
That's where they are on the totem pole. You've got so many different brands for cruising. You've got your top tier is like Silver Sea, and I think companies like that where you're paying $1,000 a night just to stay on board, right? And then you've got Carnival at the very bottom, or Ambassador and stuff over here, or they are charging you like $100 for the week, and then you've got to spend loads of money on board, and they will get it out of you somehow. But if you and your partner were ever going to do a ship, would you do like a river cruise? That might be nice.
My wife and her mother did a river cruise a couple of years ago, and they loved it. And my wife is of the same mind as I am. Neither one of us wants to go on a big cruise. Maybe a small boat Alaska cruise, or listening to her talk about the river cruise, that sounds kind of fun. It's a small ship. There's 160 people on board or something,
Yeah, and you're going past all these landmarks all the time. So You're not out in the middle of the ocean. You're like, oh, look, there's that, there. And then we're getting off. I have an episode with Ben Clift, I think at the beginning of the last season. He's working on river cruises for a while, and he talked about a lot of the problems that you can have whilst on a river cruise. So you might want to check that out.
That would be interesting to see.
Yeah.
They did. I remember they ran into some problems because, unlike the ocean, the river levels can move.
That's right. Yeah. So you're aware of some of these things. He talks about in a bit more detail, and what systems are in place to be able to continue your voyage when you are an impasse, and so you've got to take your stuff. You
get on a bus.
That's it. Yes. So
but it does look like I would be certainly more likely to do that than get on a 3,000
Well, no, they're up to 10.
person.
They're up to like 10,000, is it?
I
I
don't
think
even
with
like people that much.
with all of the crew as well to cater for the masses. I think the newest, biggest ship is around 10,000 souls, just shy, like at
Thanks.
maximum capacity. But if you smuggle on, no one's going to notice. Then you hit the 10,000 mark. But to work on one of those things, I'd imagine would be quite a hellish.
What do you do on the ship?
Well, whatever you want, mate.
Oh,
They've got everything: nightclubs, bowling alleys.
no, but I mean, what is your job?
Oh, what did I do?
Yeah.
I used to work. Well, would you like to take a guess?
Uh, I don't know the positions.
Mm,
You don't strike me as the able-bodied seaman navigator sort.
excuse me. I'm an iceberg right now. Most of my mass is beneath the surface. I could be very able-bodied, but you wouldn't know I was in a wheelchair.
No, well, it's
No, I was an entertainer. If it wasn't already obvious, Rod.
in what way did you entertain? You're supposed to be interviewing me, but
I know. We're just riffing. But I used to do game shows, quizzes,
oh,
bingos, karaoke's, things up on
like an
deck.
MC kind of thing.
You can MC, so different types
Got
of
it.
things. So with the
Oh,
things like towel folding demonstrations or ice sculpting, the guys in the crew are some very talented people, and they would do these demonstrations, and we would just MC these things, and the guests would be able to have a go at making their own towel animals and things, and they're very popular.
I would pay money not to go to that demonstration.
Well, some of
In fact,
the yeah.
if I went on a cruise, I would have paid money not to go to that demonstration.
If you could bring one artifact from the
Hmm.
Valencia or the Pacific, real or hypothetical, what would it be?
I actually have a good answer to this question, surprisingly. Um,
Well, now you've really bigged it up. I'm expecting big things.
well, it's in 26 years after the Valencia sank, one of its lifeboats appeared in Barkley Bay, off the coast of British Columbia, near Vancouver Island. This lifeboat just showed up out of nowhere, which gave rise to all kinds of weird occult sort of theories as to how that could happen.
Mm.
But most likely, what happened is it got washed into a cave, and then 26 years later, a storm surge washed it back out, and it just floated on over to Barkley Bay, and somebody found it just floating around, and on it was the nameplate Valencia Lifeboat Number 5, and someone cut that off, and it's now at the museum in Victoria. And I went and saw it and held it in my hands. And there was something about holding it that when you hold an artifact like that, it connects you to the history of the ship, but also of the people that sailed and in this case perished on the ship. And so if I were going to choose an artifact, I would like to have that nameplate.
So you didn't steal it from the museum?
It occurred to me. But the museum lady was such a nice lady.
I'm taking it for research.
She was so nice, opening up the archives to us like that I couldn't do it to her. But I did think about it.
No, that's a lovely answer, though. That's something that really connects you, and it brings the tragedy home.
Yeah.
Here's a fun one, because that was quite sad. Here's a fun question. Which fictional shipwreck gives you shivers, and would you ever write your own fictional maritime disaster?
I'm kind of terrified of writing fiction. I'm not sure why. At first, I thought it was because, well, gosh, you have to deal with dialogue and plotting and characterization and structure and all that stuff. But then I thought, well, you kind of have to do that anyway if you're writing nonfiction. You just have to do it in a way that's keeps the reader's interest, even though you can't invent that world. The world already exists. So nonetheless, I'm not sure I would write a fictional account, or if I did, I suppose if I were to write fiction and it included a shipwreck, I would be relatively well informed on that subject, so I could write it realistically. But I certainly don't have any plans to do it.
No.
And I have no plans to write about I mean, there are Titanic stories left and right all over the place, but a ship like that is going to contain great stories to tell.
Mm.
I just don't know if I'm the one to tell them.
That's fair enough.
I'm not, in fictional terms. I
Well,
mean,
have you seen Ghost Ship?
I don't think so.
It's like got one of the most, oh my God, what am I watching kind of opening scenes I think I've seen in a long time. I won't spoil it for you, but yeah, you could just go on YouTube and type in opening 5 minutes or whatever of Ghost Ship. That's fictional. So some food for thought there.
All right, well, I'll look at it.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't seen it, but
Okay.
it's quite eye-opening. It's not a new film either. Lastly,
No.
what's your go-to icebreaker if you've got one for when you meet other maritime historians?
Um,
Is there such a thing?
what dead people have you been writing about? I,
Yeah, sure.
I don't usually present myself as a writer, and this may be because I've only done 2 books on the subject.
Yeah.
I usually don't present myself as a writer of shipwreck stories or even maritime history. I just present myself as a writer, and I've been doing it for many, many, many years, and I've written about a lot of different things. Lately, I happen to be writing about shipwrecks, and I enjoy it, so I may continue doing it, especially if the publisher keeps saying, yes, we'll send you money if you do this.
Why not?
I think that's the only answer I have is that I don't usually do that.
No, that's fine. And plus, you also said you don't really like people, so you wouldn't be at one of these events where you need an icebreaker either way.
I can, like, I was at a party the other day. I was trying to be polite and stuff. I
Yeah.
smiled.
That's enough.
I didn't mean it, but I smiled.
Well, I think we've more or less come to the end of all the questions
Okay.
I've got. If there's any way we can, tell the listeners how to find you, the website is
RodScher.com, RODSCHER.com.
That's great. And the books are all there, everything you've written about the shipwrecks.
They're all up there, but they're also all on Amazon and at Barnes & Noble and maybe even your local independent bookstore, we hope.
I'll check them out. Hey, is there anything you wanted to promote real quick?
Not really. Just, go out and buy my books and so I can afford the new guitar strings and things. And,
Are you playing something for a sea shanty?
I haven't. I have never played a sea shanty. I may have listened to a sea shanty, but that's about it. I'm not big on sea shanties.
Well, I was going to say, pretend you are. People buy Rod's book so he can buy strings so he can record a sea shanty.
I'll play. If you buy enough books, I'll play a sea shanty.
There we go. That's
Okay.
the plug. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you this evening, Rod. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's been fun.
Yeah, it has been fun. I'm glad we got to do this, and I wish you all the best with the last bits of research for your book, and I hope it flies off the shelves, my friend.
Well, we'll see. If you see it on the shelf, you could help it fly off the shelf.
I will do. All right.
Okay.
Take
All
care,
right.
my friend.
Thank you. It's good talking to you.
Nice one. All the best.
You
Bye-bye.
too.
So there you have it. That wraps it up for this episode of Deck Tales. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've been entertained by the tales of laughter, camaraderie and the occasional stormy sea, then don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a comment. There are lots of other shows out there to compete with, so if you are enjoying Deck Tales, why not help us out by going over to Spotify or Apple and dropping us a 5-star rating. This will boost the show's visibility and help to attract new listeners every week. Before I sign off, if you'd like to share your own stories for future episodes, then I'd love to hear from you. Simply get in touch over the socials, because after all, the best stories often come from our listeners. As we navigate through the waters of life, remember to enjoy the journey as much as the destination, as well as those you choose to share the adventure with. I've been your Captain Sammy Catlin. Until next time, fair winds, smooth sailing, and may your adventures be as unforgettable as those shared here on Deck Tales. Bon voyage!